I appreciate you joining us today. It is June 29th. June 29th, our reading today comes from the book of Isaiah. It is Isaiah chapter 1, around verse 21, and it runs through Isaiah chapter 5. And what we see within the passage is quite a bit of judgmental language, as you can probably guess just from the heading of this passage, the unfaithful city, as we see there. But as we go through, and like I said, hopefully perhaps you've read it, or if not, perhaps you'll read it after this discussion, but you do have a good bit of judgmental language and a good bit of condemnation of the state of the people at this time, and to just go through, as you can see, some of the things that were going to happen. Speaking about captivity, such things as that. But our reading goes all the way through chapter 5 today. And you have the picture of the vineyard being used throughout the passage. But let's come back, and I would like to look in chapter 2 to begin with, to actually read. In chapter 2, let's start in verse 1. The word that Isaiah, the son of Amoz, or however you pronounce that name, I'll have to look it up, concerning Judah and Jerusalem. Now it shall come to pass in the latter days. Hopefully that sounds familiar to you. The latter days. You might think of the book of Joel. You might think of Acts chapter 2. Shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations, plural, shall flow to it. Many people shall come and say, Come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations and rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. O house of Jacob, come and let us walk in the light of the Lord. While the passage, as I said, there is a good bit of condemnation of God's people, but at the same time there is a promise of better things ahead. Remember, when they come back from captivity, they're getting ready for the Messiah. And in getting ready for the Messiah, you have the Messiah who's going to establish his kingdom. And as we think about the nature of his kingdom, we understand those promises that were given to Abraham. In you all the nations, plural, shall be blessed. Here all the nations shall flow to it. Many people shall come and say, Let us go up to the mountain of the Lord. For out of Zion shall go forth the law. Verse 4, He shall judge between the nations, plural, and rebuke many people. What we see is, in this coming kingdom, established by the coming Messiah, is we see that it is open to all. That it is not just for the Jews, it is for the Jews and the Gentiles. It is for all the nations. And it is an absolutely wonderful thing that whoever calls upon the name of the Lord shall be blessed. That it is open to all and they will come, as it says, that figure of the law going out. So it is open to all to learn and to obey. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. That all can learn and obey, not a select few, not a select country. That all the nations shall flow to it. God, from one blood, has made all people in hopes that all will grope for him and find him. So that's the first thing I wanted to point out. While the passage overall, our reading today, that there is much condemnation, at the same time, there is also the great promises and great hope. From the same passage, it's a passage about peace. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. And you have this picture of peace. As it says, neither shall they learn war any more. and we think about the peace that is found in the kingdom and the changing of the kingdom, that it's not going to be, oh, it is the time that the kings go out to war anymore. This kingdom's not going to be like that. That this kingdom's going to be different. And I wanted you to consider the difference, the figures that are being used here, as they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. I want you to think about what both plowshares and pruning hooks, what that is a figure of. Those are farming implements. Now, the point I wanted to make is, okay, how do you truly conquer? In this coming kingdom, how do you truly conquer? Is it going to be through swords? Is it going to be, as this passage talks about, through spears? Is it going to be those carnal weapons? Or is it going to be by sowing? Is it going to be through the parable of the soils, the parable of the sower? Is it going to be through the fruit of the Spirit? Is it actually going to be through farming? Is that ultimately how God's victories are going to be won? This kingdom is going to be different. This kingdom is different. That we learn peace, but at the same time we learn how to change the landscape. And you have these farming pictures being used. Come over to chapter 4 now. Over in chapter 4, we have another section. In chapter 4, at verse 2, in that day the branch of the Lord shall be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and appealing for those of Israel who have escaped. And it shall come to pass that he who is left in Zion and remains in Jerusalem will be called holy, every one who is recorded among the living in Jerusalem, when the Lord has washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion, and purged the blood of Jerusalem from her midst, by the spirit of judgment and by the spirit of burning. Then the Lord will create above every dwelling place of Mount Zion and above her assemblies a cloud and smoke by day, and the shining of a flaming fire by night. For over all the glory there will be a covering. My translation says that word covering there. It's the idea of a canopy. There will be a tabernacle for shade in the daytime from the heat, for a place of refuge, and for a shelter from storm and rain. What we find in this kingdom is protection. That's what this is. That figure of a cloud and smoke by day and the flaming fire by night, that goes back to the Exodus. And we're talking about protection. We're talking about protection. We're talking about a refuge. We're talking about, that figure of shade from the noonday heat, there will be a covering. Tabernacle for shade in the daytime from the heat, a place of refuge, shelter from storm and rain. Protection. This kingdom is open to all to learn and to obey. This is where we learn peace. This is where we learn how the landscape is changed, and this is where we find protection. Yes, within our reading today, there is God's judgment upon His people, and you can tell God is disappointed in His people, but at the same time there is a promise of better things, and those better things are found in the coming Messiah and His kingdom. And that is the kingdom that we're a part of, that we need to be a part of. And we glorify God in His Son's kingdom. Appreciate you following along with us. I hope you're having a good day. Hope everything is going well. I hope you join us for our next brief look into God's Word.